Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Firebrand channel. I wanted to talk a little bit today about the differences between left and right wing. I found previously that one of the things that determines people's positioning themselves is how they consider the left and right wing spectrum to be. And often people who consider themselves to be very separate on the spectrum, on the left-right wing spectrum, actually share a lot of the same values and are perhaps closer to each other's positions than they think. They feel like they're further away because they have different definitions of what left and right wing are. So I thought it'd be really useful to look at that today. And what better place to start than with a little bit of history of what left and right wing mean. So the left and right wing, it comes from the French Revolution. So you'll see often we have situations like this where we'll have the benches of government separated, usually or often according to the political left-right wing spectrum, the dichotomy of left and right wing, that comes from the French Revolution. So we ended up in France with anti-royalists sitting on the left, and the conservative aristocratic supporters of the monarchy sitting on the right-hand side. And so newspaper reports would refer to those on the left wing, those on the right wing. And so those terms were adopted for the traditionalists, at least in this sense, the traditionalists pushing for that kind of that monarchism, essentially, that kind of elites, the being ruled by authoritarians, that kind of authoritarian rule where people didn't have a right to pick and decide who it is who governed them. The governing class were elite, and so they should rule over everybody. And then on the left wing, we had people fighting for the people, by the people, for the people, fighting for democracy, fighting for the rights of the people over the rights of the few elites ruling over them. And so we had this left-right wing dichotomy. And so I think that's a really useful place to start. Although there's been a lot today, there's a lot of differences today, maybe not differences as such, but I guess development of the concept. So there's a whole lot more that we associate with left wing and right wing concepts. So let's have a look. Here's a book by Andrew Haywood called Key Concepts in Politics and International Relations, where he emphasizes the differences of the left and right wing as being the left wing being ideas such as freedom, equality, fraternity, rights, progression, reform, and internationalism, whereas the right wing is characterized by emphasis on notions such as authority, hierarchy, order, duty, tradition, reaction, and nationalism. So we start to have different ideas that are associated with the left and right wing, and most people's positions are an array of different and often disparate positions, which are scattered across the political spectrum. So let's have a look at some of them. Let's have a look. There's one here. So the left and right wing. So different argue that the left and right wing ideologies center around the rights of individuals versus the power of the government, with left wings believing in liberalism. That means sort of individual rights, that individuals should have rights, and believe in expanded role of the government in order to protect those rights. And the people on the right believe that the best outcomes for society are achieved when individual rights and civil are paramount, and the role, especially the power of government, is minimized. Now, it's interesting to think about the dichotomy in relation to rights. Here, I have to say I would disagree a little with the emphasis being on individual rights and civil liberties with the right wing. In terms of right wing, references to individual rights and civil liberties, these are less encoded into law and protected, and more sort of an emphasis on individualism, as in it is your right and your duty to protect and look after yourself, and the role of the government is therefore minimized. So it's less about individual rights so much as it is about individual responsibilities. In any sense, we associate a variety of different political positions with the left wing and the right wing. So the left wing, as I said, associated with liberalism, so allowing everybody to be and do what they want largely, and conservatives on the right wing in terms of hearkening back to the past, which typically is limiting civil liberties. So on the left wing, we have economic policies which generally require higher taxes. So they mean things like incorporating healthcare into the tax burden. So everybody paying taxes, which are weighted by how much you earn, how much wealth you have. So they're kind of means tested. Taxes are means tested, and so incorporating those into taxes. Whereas on the right wing, you have opposition to universal healthcare. So everybody should be responsible for their own healthcare. So you end up having, like we have in America, if people run out of money, all you need is a serious health condition, and that will strip away hundreds of thousands of pounds for you. Whatever assets that you have, you'll lose them. And so we have this kind of socialist concept. So socialism is a word that's associated with the left. So on the left, we have higher taxes, but we get a lot more public services for our taxes. We get, better infrastructure. We have regulations on businesses. So stopping businesses from, for example, doing whatever they like, pumping pollution into rivers and such. And on the right, we have lower taxes, but then lower regulations on businesses and lower public services. In terms of immigration, the left usually focus on things like pathways to citizenship, and less on deportations and prosecutions. On the right, we have more hard lines with their associations with nationalism. Educational policy on the left wing, we kind of focus on expanded free public education with the idea that everybody should have an equality of opportunity, certainly as children. So if we want to make the best use of people's skills and abilities as a society, we should give everybody equal chance. We work much better as a society if we educate those people who are able to be educated, if we make best use of their ideas and thoughts. Whereas on the right wing, we believe more that individuals are tasked and responsible for educating their own children, paying for their educations and such. So you have things like private schools, where if you're rich, your children will be better educated than if you are poor. So there you go. we have things like abortion rights. This is a more recent thing politically, actually. It wasn't always such a divide. And you'll find a lot of these topics, they become issues that are associated with the left or right wing, or they become a split at one point and less a split at others. So left wing is associated more with a woman's right to choose, and the legalization of reproductive health care, including abortion, because not necessarily because they encourage abortions, but really because the outcomes tend to be a lot worse for women when we deny abortions. They tend to be worse for women and children and anybody who is family minded, really, but specifically for the women who tend to give birth to the children. Not all women give birth to children, though, and in rarer cases, not all people who are women, not all people who give birth are women. Generally, on the right wing, people are against abortion rights. We've seen in America, for example, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the big legal case which protected the right to abortion across the different states. That has been removed because of right-wing justices appointed to the Supreme Court. So that's another issue. Gay rights. So again, allowing everybody to be who they want to be, so long as they're not hurting other people, is an issue associated with the left wing. Opposing the support for anti-LGBT discriminations is a right-wing position, typically associated with authoritarian rule, such as church rule, going back many years. Rare for people to be associated with church rule in the Western world these days, but progressively more so, that's becoming a thing, with people arguing for the introduction of Christianity into schools and schooling, state mandated education and such. So yeah. Gun rights, again, the background checks for people with mental illnesses and things like that is a position widely held on the left wing, whereas opposition to any gun control at all is associated with the right wing. Now, that's not necessarily a position which is an authoritarian position. Having a well-armed militia, which was how it's phrased in the American history. The right wing being associated with the holding of arms is actually grown more out of the fact that large corporate interests tend to fund right-wing parties and politicians more than they would fund left-wing politicians. Right-wing businesses are more interested in funding politicians who might, for example, lower their tax burden or remove their necessity to contribute to healthcare, or reduce the amount that the government pays on education, because then it's reducing the tax burden further. They might also be in favour of reducing rights for their workers. In fact, they largely are in favour of reducing rights for their workers. So things like regulations on businesses on the left wing, like I said about pollution, for example, they're against those. So you'll find right-wing politicians will fund you'll find big money will fund right-wing politicians much more than they'll fund left-wing politicians, which is strange because right-wingers really shouldn't want to have a well-armed proletariat. They shouldn't want to have well-armed workforce, well-armed working class, because it gives them the capacity to fight back against authoritarian rule, which was the purpose of it to begin with in America. However, the gun lobby is big business selling guns, and so the gun lobby have funded right-wing politicians so that they're in favor of this, whereas common sense gun legislation, despite the fact that a well-armed militia was intended to be a protection of democracy, it is now flipped. Which is an interesting point. Environmental policies, again, generally conservative environmental policies, i.e. retention of our current biodiversities, our current environment, preferring to ban economic activities that may create jobs but potentially harm the environment. So if I could, for example, open up a large factory, but that factory would pump a lot of pollution into the environment and kill everything around it, the left wing would tend to disfavor that, whereas the right wing would be more permissive, including considerations of economic impact more so than generally permissive, considering economic impact much less than they would their considerations about economic activity. Voter ID laws, again, voter ID laws is something which really shouldn't, maybe it should be left and right wing actually thinking about it, but still, it's not inherently a left wing, right wing position, all things being even, because if voting laws didn't affect who voted, then it shouldn't really be left wing or right wing. However, we do know that voting ID laws disenfranchises the poorest people, as they're likely to have less ID, and so it becomes an authoritarian issue, because as an authoritarian you want to disenfranchise voters as much as possible, because you wish to rule through structure, through power, and through diktat. You wish to have the elites, those successful in capitalism. So we have those successful in capitalism having a lot of money and power, and so wishing to maintain their grip on power. Ideologies such as social democracy, i.e. everybody owning things, having things like social healthcare, making sure that people are able to receive healthcare regardless of whether they're rich or poor. So we have these social aspects, things being provided to societies, and on the further left, things like communism, where everybody has equality of outcome. So we move away from billionaires owning everything, and we move more towards through socialism, where we have some things being provided to everybody, through to communism, where everybody should have equality of outcome. So it doesn't matter whether you're born with a physical condition which limits your capacity to become physically involved with labor or practices, or whether maybe you have mental health conditions or that limit your capacity to do that, or whether you have limitations of wealth. So, for example, as a poor person, I might be a genius, but I might be stuck working at a job which doesn't allow me to exercise my genius, because I was never educated to the level that I was capable of being educated to. So I didn't get the qualifications, and so I didn't manage to contribute to society. I didn't create those new technologies or ideas that really help society. So those are the different ones. I'm not going to go through the proponents of it. I did, however, find this excellent image which lists a lot of different aspects of the left and right wing. And I thought it would be worth going over this, perhaps in just a little bit more detail. So let's have a look around. I wonder whether I can move around in here very easily. Okay, so on the left wing, we have, sort of moving further left, we have different political parties that might be aligned with the left-right wing. Now, these are associated with, I guess, fairly centre grounds, at least the parties that we're used to talking about in more Western societies. And the sort of more extreme ends of it, sort of communism and extreme nationalism, are areas that we've rarely seen. We're seeing more nationalism today. In fact, if you look at how we are today as a society, you'll probably find that we are much more right-wing as a society than left-wing at the moment. Certainly discussions in America with people becoming very nationalist, arguments about locking down the borders tighter and tighter all the time, arguments about make America great again, America for America, these sort of America first, and in the UK, these extreme the backlash that we had with Brexit, removing the UK from the European Union, and the growth and further acceptance of organizations such as Turning Point and politicians such as Marianne Le Pen in France, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. These are sort of, nationalist leaders. And in America, obviously Trump and the nearly 15 years of right-wing Tory conservative lead, where they're pandering ever more towards nationalist base. I think it's fairly clear to see that politics has moved quite a lot to the right wing. So yeah, let's look at some of the other concepts. So we have concepts in society of inclusiveness, multiculturalism, and evolution, so that you've got progression here. So, evolution, evolvingness, working ever more towards progressive solutions. Whereas we have conservative and preservation. When it says preservation, it really means sort of people tend to have this kind of focus on what things were like when they were younger, and they tend to look back with rose-tinted glasses. And so when people say preservation, often they mean preservation of how things were when they were younger. They see how things are today as being progressive, and how things were when they were younger as being better. So when people talk about conservatism and preservation, usually they mean sort of rolling back the clock. So we've got some other concepts here, sort of police and police states. Obviously, if you want to be a right-wing authoritarian type government where you have diktat, where you have strong structures, conservatism, then you have things like the police and the military keeping order. We have order and structure. We have businesses, an emphasis on the business. Whereas on the left wing, we have media influences. We have professors and scientists and sciences and teachers. We have much less rigid structures where we allow people to be themselves. We have emphases on relationships and respect, whereas here we have rigid structure. We have more rigid structure. Instilling moral strength and absolutes. So moral strength and absolutes, self-defense, so emphasis on the self, morality, discipline, strict parents, skills and succeed. So we have an emphasis on hierarchical top-down structure on the right wing. On the left wing, we have nurturing, we have learning, asking questions, inquisitiveness, empathy, moral diversity, and respect. So these are ideas associated with sort of left-wing community, culture, and ethics. On the right-wing, morals, structure, morals and structure-based community. In terms of beliefs, on the left, on the right wing, we've got theism. So belief in, and that kind of ties in with a lot of right-wing thought. Theism, that kind of diktat on how being told what you should do. Organization, convention. So these are things that resonate with right-wing ideologies. equality is opportunity, freedom is the chance to achieve or fail, but which is best? Freedom. I'm not really sure what that's driving at. Equality is opportunity, whereas equality is a level playing field. So, I mean, see, often these phrases, equality is opportunity, and that is true, but the equality of opportunity is not a right-wing concept. The idea that you have an opportunity and that is enough, everybody gets an opportunity in life and that should be enough, is a right-wing concept. The idea of equality of opportunity, so equality means everybody getting a level playing field, that is a left-wing concept. So in terms of beliefs, rights, others must not interfere and others must observe. Again, this is a little vague and down to interpretation. Homelessness is downtrodden victims of the system. So often poverty will make people homeless. So, for example, if you lose your home, maybe the interest rates rise. We've seen a lot of that recently. That can cause people to become homeless. I was talking to a homeless guy recently who was outside the supermarket, who mentioned that he lost his home when he went through a separation and moved in with his mum. His mum fell ill. She was elderly and had to sell her home to move into a sheltered home, supported living environment. The cost for which can be very large, and so he found himself homeless. If you don't have a deposit for a home, so there's a lot to do with poverty and homelessness. Again, going back to LGBT support, the number of LGBT people on the streets is very large. If you've ever experienced homeless from people, from parents who eject their children because they're LGBT, then you'll be aware of the fact that once you're homeless, it's very hard to crawl out from that. Whereas on the right, the idea is that homelessness is down to work ethic and no sense of shame. So people electing to live homelessly, which is quite ridiculous, I think, as a notion, but I think you're probably already getting a good sense of where I sit on the spectrum. So we've seen here things like gay rights support, abortion war that we spoke about earlier on. Let's have a look. So votes for aggression and militancy, they're associated with the right wing. It's really interesting hearing certain people operating in this kind of mid-space when they're trying to convince people to move more towards the right, that people in the right wing here are often talking about being anti-war at the moment. And that is I would suggest because a lot of money coming in on the right wing, coming in from oligarchs in Russia, for example, are keen to dissuade war with Russia. And so we're seeing external influences press against war, which has been a really interesting development. But yeah, so aggression and militancy, if you think about it, it aligns very well with people who have strong hierarchical support structures, discipline, rigid support structures, and nationalism leads one naturally to aggression and militancy. And once you factor in the influence of the right wing associations with corporate interests and corporate lobbying for defense contractors, then it's easy to see why war is usually pushed by the right wing, whereas on the left wing they would naturally favor diplomacy and pacifism, voting for fairness and helping those who can't help themselves, providing positive role models. So this is really the left-wing, right-wing dichotomy, although describing it as a dichotomy, although perhaps theoretically true, is really in practical terms not really true, because often you'll find a lot of people will will have opinions which are split across the spectrum. So they won't hold just single opinions. They'll hold opinions that are a mix of both left-wing and right-wing opinions. So I want to start marking this up, because the next thing that I want to do is to consider where some people sit on this spectrum. So I might switch briefly to display capture, but let's have a quick summary before I do that. Let's go to the left and right wing. So on the left wing, we have perspectives typically associated with embracing ideals, social justice, collective responsibility, advocating for government interventions to address societal inequalities, provide public services, and include things like democracy. Democracy is a left-wing concept, socialism, and to the far left, communism. And on the right wing, we have things like social conservatism, limited government interventions, a focus on the economic marketplace, particularly capitalism, and on the far right, sort of complete rampant free market capitalism, i.e. letting capitalism resolve all problems and removing other legislations with the idea that free market can resolve all these issues. Personal responsibility, there's something that hasn't come up in the others, but one that I mentioned earlier on. So you're responsible for yourself, and if you experience homelessness or troubles, then that's down to you. The primacy of traditional values, right-wing ideologies include neoliberalism, that's on your sort of centre-right, right-wing populism, and heading towards fascism on the far right, and authoritarianism. So these are the considerations that we have for the left and the right wing. So let's pop this one open. I'm just going to share briefly. Okay, so I have the picture loaded up here, and I wanted to consider various different famous people, and we can have a look and see how they sit on the chart. So to start off with, I have John Lennon. John Lennon, he was famous for being a vocal supporter of peace, activism, and anti-war movements. So that would fall here under diplomacy and pacifism. He was an advocate for social justice and equality. So here we have, must be equality. Here we go. And our social justice elements are here. He criticized capitalism, so it was anti-capitalism. Let's gonna switch to red for this. So over here on this side we have capitalism. Do we have it written down here somewhere? Nationalism. Somewhere on here should be capitalism. It is one of the ideas that we discussed earlier on, although I think it might be missing from here. I'm going to put it here as an X because it's definitely on that side. Criticized capitalism and imperialism. Imperial being sort of imperial rule, like we had in the UK. It's being ruled by elites, so again it's a big X on this side. Supported progressive causes such as civil rights and women's rights. Again, that is on the left hand side. So women's rights, where does it fit in over here? It's definitely the rights over on this side. Civil rights in particular, so things like anti-racism, equality. So John Lennon, very much a left-wing person. I think we can agree. Okay, let's go back. Let's have a think about our next person. Our next person is Nelson Mandela, famous for being a leading figure in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. Apartheid was an enforced authoritarian structure over on the right hand side. So anti-apartheid therefore means to be on this side over here. Multiculturalism, inclusive and evolving. So that would fit in there too. He championed the struggle against racial segregation and oppression. Again, that's on this side. He advocated for social and economic equality for all South Africans. So again, equalities and freedom. He embraced socialist policies. That's going to be socialism, should be up here somewhere. Egalitarianism, equality, we've also got that here. Looks to the future, progressive. So, I mean, I think you're getting an idea that Nelson Mandela was also left-wing aligned. Fairness, helping others, championing the downtrodden. That's just here. So, yeah, again, Nelson Mandela, very left-wing aligned. Let's have a look at Jordan Peterson. What do we know about Jordan Peterson? Well, I did a video recently on Jordan Peterson, so if you want to have a look at some of his political opinions, then that would be a good place to start. But he criticizes political correctness, so he is not a fan of political correctness. He doesn't advocate for political correctness so much as he advocates for free speech. Now, free speech is an interesting issue because authoritarianism isn't necessarily a free speech aligned aspect, so that wouldn't necessarily sit very well here. Although it depends on the kind of speech that you qualify as being free speech, because you'll often find a lot of the people who are shouting about free speech are shouting about free speech precisely because they want to advocate against things like equality. My pen won't stop moving around. There we go. So they want to advocate against things like equality, and so that would place if the speech you're protecting is over here, then that would place you over here. But naturally, free speech in and of itself would be an emphasis on left-wing values, really. So we've got this kind of mixed thing where actually, I think if you look at the kind of speech that Jordan Peterson is saying, then it's all this kind of right-wing speech that he wants to protect, this kind of rampant individualism. He talks often about his objection to equalities of outcome, and all of the speech that he is trying to protect is this kind of anti-civil rights movement kind of speech. So it places it over there, whilst at the same time acknowledging that actually allowing people to speak their mind is part of respect and trust, and is actually part of democracy, which is a left-wing aligned principle. So left-wing focus on democracy. So yeah, I need to reduce these perhaps because they aren't exactly what Jordan Peterson is valuing. So let's move those back a little so we can accept that there's maybe a slight split there. He rejects identity politics and emphasizes individualism. So let's have a look. Is individualism here? It should be here somewhere. It will be on this side. Otherwise, we'll put a hoop around it. There we go. Self-reliance. He criticizes left-wing ideologies such as Marxism and capitalism, socialism. So let me scroll down just a little bit. Finding the mouse a little difficult to operate at times. It's actually a pen, so there you go, that's why. So he criticizes these. So I think it's fairly clear to see that despite Jordan Peterson's protestations, he is clearly right-wing aligned. And actually that makes sense because he made a conservative manifesto. Let me just switch my pen colour again. He made a conservative manifesto, you might remember. Okay, so somebody else that you might be familiar with if you're used to listening to American politics is Bernie Sanders, a long-time advocate for progressive. It's that instantly. It's one of the words over here where we have a progressive future-looking. Where's the future-looking? Equalities, freedoms, protecting minorities, champions of the downtrodden. Let's have a look. I'm failing to find progressives over here. I know it's on here somewhere. I saw it earlier on. I'll just leave the hoop up that I've already drawn. Okay. There we go. Progressive and mature. He is a long-time advocate for Medicare for all. That's a social healthcare, so socialist construct. That may or may not be. Here we go. Social and scientific, organized, unconventional. Undo that little dot there. Helping those who cannot help themselves. It would fall under there. Let's see, are there any others? Social healthcare. It's not. Social healthcare is not listed down here because I'm guessing because it's a specific policy, but it very definitely would fall in this category as we've seen before. A strong supporter of workers' rights and labor unions. Now, unions are very definitely unions. My awful writing in this chunky marker. Unions are very definitely here because they are about respecting the rights of others, society for all and not just for one. They are about fairness, helping those who can't help themselves, and championing the downtrodden. It's about those. He's a critic of income inequality, corporate influence in politics. Now, corporate influence in politics, corporations, very large, powerful corporations, would tend to sit on the right-hand side. Those structures here providing hierarchy. They are the rich, powerful elites. They would sit on this side. So it's very clear to see that Bernie Sanders is a left-wing figure. Let's just have a look at a couple more of interest. Tucker Carlson's recently been doing the rounds on supposedly balanced news sources. I think, well, he does actually admit that he is right-wing. So we'll see what he says. Let's see how he aligns, because people don't always speak accurately. So he is a host of a conservative-leaning commentary show on Fox News, so that instantly puts him with conservatives over here. He openly identifies as right-wing, so that's it for a start. He espouses traditionalist and nationalist values. He often talks about the Great Replacement theory. So talking about immigration control is a large aspect of his discussions. He's known for his opposition to political correctness. He wrote down in his yearbook that he wanted to be known as a member of the Harvey Milk fan club. Sorry, not Harvey Milk, the person who assassinated Harvey Milk. Who was the first openly gay senator in America, I believe. So yes, very definitely anti those things and very definitely on the right wing. Now, a lot of talk has been broadcast recently on Vladimir Putin, and trying, I guess, to muddy the waters with regards to Vladimir Putin. He leads the United Russia Party, which promotes conservative values and nationalism. He implemented policies supporting the traditional family. So we have things like, the traditional family, community morals, established nationalistic preserving of the family. There we go. So theism, conventionalism, he is associated with these values. He's not interested in equality. In fact, he recently introduced further legislation to attack the LGBT community in Russia. So he's known for his stance against liberal democracy. So against liberal democracy. Go on, let's put a big anti-liberal democracy mark over here. And critics accuse him of suppressing political opposition and undermining democratic institutions. So anti-democracy, authoritarian rule. He is very definitely extremely right-wing. Now, the next person is probably not going to surprise you how they're going to turn out, but there's an interesting point about our next person, who will be Hitler. So I'm going to look a little bit at Hitler, who was leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, which sounds very left-wing. The National socialism being a left-wing concept, and Workers' Party, workers' rights should be very left-wing. But this is quite common, this kind of faux left-wingness, or basically people not wanting to be seen as right-wing. And because of the discussions that we've had so far, you might very well be able to see why that is. Discussions on left-wing and right-wing, the associations with authoritarianism mean that people often very keen not to be seen with those kind of associations. Yet, let's have a look at some of the things that they actually did. They advocated for extreme nationalism. It's no secret that the Nazis were incredibly nationalist, very anti-Jewish, for example. They were very conservative in terms of their immigration stance. They thought that they were racially superior, so they definitely weren't interested in equality for everybody. They imprisoned people for being gay. They put them in concentration camps. It's about as nationalistic as you can get in terms of, well, maybe not give it a tick considering the horrible nature of the policies, but definitely is associated with this side of the spectrum. They were expansionist from the military. It's about as severe as you can get from a military perspective in terms of invading different countries. So they pursued expansionist and militaristic policies leading to World War II and the Holocaust. They promoted fascistic ideology, and fascism is on the extreme right wing. So you'll see this quite a lot. We've seen it with people like Jordan Peterson, the kind of those not wanting to be associated with the right wing because they realize that actually these right wing policies are typically not very popular over time. People tend to rise up and overthrow fascistic dictators. So Hitler, despite being supposedly the leader of a socialist party, was very right-wing and not socialist at all. Tony Blair. Now, Tony Blair I've put on this list because I think it's, again, interesting to think about where we sit as a society now. If we look at the board that we have, we think about at the moment with rising nationalism, with Trump, Conservative Party's been in power in the UK and certainly other Western democracies, electing people like Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, people like Viktor Orban in Hungary. There has been very definite move with Brexit. democratic institutions, are people are openly talking about moving away from democracy in America, with Trump's "I want to be a dictator," and people saying, "Yeah, I'm okay with dictator Trump." Labor movement's very much on the decline. Communism, certainly in Western societies, hasn't had a look in a long time, and the parties, I think probably where we are then is somewhere around here. This tends to be, political discourse tends to move from political party alignments and democracy, let's say, through to nationalism and nationalist democracy. So this tends to be where our Overton window is at the moment. In terms of political discourse. Let's have a look at somebody who is often referred to as being on the left wing, because of his associations with the Labour Party. So I'm talking about Tony Blair. He's often associated with being on the left wing or being a centrist. So let's have a look, and we'll talk about some of his policies. Let's just quickly see. I can, yeah, okay. I'm gonna leave this purple check here because I can't seem to remove it or undo it at the moment. Maybe I can press and hold there. Can't see an eraser. Nope. No eraser for me. Let me move that away. Okay, close that up. Right, so let's think about Tony Blair. Tony Blair was the leader of the Labour Party. So although, as we've seen, that doesn't mean much, but I'm going to put like a little small tick there. He served as Prime Minister from 97 to 2007. So he was in for a very long time in terms of being Prime Minister. That's quite a long reign. He's associated with the Third Way or New Labour ideology, which is associated with free market capitalism, which is a right-wing concept. We talked about free market capitalism being a right-wing concept. And neoliberalism, which is a centre-right policy. He supported interventionist foreign policies. In fact, he was most widely remembered for his position on the Iraq War, for being associated with foreign policies, including the invasion of Iraq. He is associated with privatization of public services and maintaining conservative fiscal policies. Now, these are both concepts, privatization being part of sort of is taking what were previously socialist structures, things like our water boards and our nationalised services in the UK, and turning them into corporate interest, corporate-owned structures. Okay, let's see. He was, despite being a member of the Labour Party, Blair's leadership saw a move towards centrist and liberal economic policies, leading to some critics arguing that he was more pursued right-wing policies. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly safe to say that Blair was very definitely a right of centre politician. It's easy to see, however, if we go back to considering our Overton window, we put our Overton window, as about being from here to here, that he was in the centre of the political discourse. However, the political discourse has been progressively more and more right-wing. Donald Trump is inarguably right-wing. It won't take us more than a moment to talk about his nationalist America First policies, his deregulation policies associated with economics. I think a lot of what's missing from this diagram is the economic aspects. So I'll just kind of do a general economic aspects here. He is for strong military and police. He has a hard-line stance on immigration policy. He is known for his nationalistic rhetoric, so very, very right-wing policies from Donald Trump. Hopefully this has been useful and interesting in getting people onto the same page in terms of what left and right wing are. And certainly as we go forward and I talk about left wing and right wing spectrum and the dichotomy of left and right wing, then I will be referring to things with this kind of definition in mind. So hopefully that's been interesting and useful. And I'll see you again for the next video on the Firebrand channel.